Trust me, I get it. You're feeling the pressure to keep your faith separate from your work, worried that pursuing your God-given dreams might be seen as selfish or misguided. For far too long, we've been held back by a world that tells us that faith and ambition don't mix, that our divinely inspired visions are just wishful thinking. But here's what I've discovered. Our faith isn't a liability in our leadership. As a matter of fact, it's the source of our strength and wisdom. When we fully integrate our leadership with our Christian values, then and only then do we tap into that unshakable divine power. The real challenge is navigating how to boldly pursue our purpose while staying anchored in our faith. And that's exactly what the Beacon Show is all about. Each week, we bring you biblical wisdom and practical strategies from true beacons, Christian leaders who are illuminating the world. And it's also that you can let your light shine brighter and brighter. I'm Tamara Jackson, and this is The Beacon Show. Are you called to tackle topics that others may shy away from? Well, today's guest is living proof that when we steward the ideas that God places on our hearts, He can use them to transform lives in a way that we have never imagined. Dan Merchant is an Emmy award-winning television writer, producer, and director, best known for his hit series, Going Home. But beyond the accolades, Dan is a storyteller with a burning passion to express truth in a way that connects with the human experience. From a young age, Dan found solace and inspiration in the music of the Beatles, discovering a world of creativity that bore little resemblance to his own turbulent upbringing. As he began to explore his own voice through writing and filmmaking, Dan couldn't escape the sense that he'd been entrusted with something sacred, a calling to tell stories that matter. Fast forward to the launch of Going Home, a poignant drama about hospice nurses that almost didn't see the light of day. When the idea first struck Dan, he knew it was a Holy Spirit download, but the degree of difficulty was daunting. How do you make a show about death and dying that people actually want to watch? But Dan leaned into the challenge, assembling a team of talented actors and crew members who shared his vision. He even invited his wife to join the writer's room, recognizing her unique gifts of observation and empathy. Together, they crafted a series that honestly explores the beauty and pain of life's final chapter. In this candid conversation, Dan pulls back the curtain on his creative process, sharing powerful stories of how Going Home has touched lives and opened doors for authentic connection. He also opens up about his own journey of loss and legacy, and why he believes our most impactful work often springs from our deepest wounds. Whether you're a fellow creative, a person grieving the loss of a loved one, or simply someone wrestling with life's biggest questions, Dan's wisdom will leave you encouraged, challenged, and inspired to be a good steward of the message that is burning in your soul. So grab a box of tissues, get ready to laugh and cry, and join us for this unforgettable conversation with the one and only Dan Merchant. Enjoy. Well, Dan, welcome to the Beacon Show, where wisdom meets faith and success finds its voice. So honored to have you here with us today. Welcome to the show.
Great. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, Dan, you are a writer, a producer, you wear all of these hats today, but I'm always curious where things started. So can you start by telling us a little bit about how you grew up?
I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, just outside of Seattle, Washington. I'm the eldest of three. I have two little brothers, two not little anymore. None of us are. My folks split when I was 8, and in there somewhere I discovered, right around, probably not coincidentally in hindsight, I discovered the music of the Beatles. And I found just this great attraction to the creative expression in this music. And I think in retrospect and years of therapy, I think what I found was evidence of a much larger world and evidence of a much more interesting, hopeful, dynamic world that bore no resemblance to the one I was living in. So, when you hear Strawberry Fields Forever or Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, you're like, what universe is this expression from?
Mm.
And even at that young age, I was very aware of how I was moved by that music, emotionally, intellectually. There's a lyric in I Am the Walrus that said, "Man, you should have seen them kick an Edgar Allan Poe." And I'm like, who's Edgar Allan Poe? And I go look, and it's like, oh, it's a writer, and he wrote these books, and so it just became this doorway. I learned pretty early that creativity was a very interesting way to express yourself to the world. And I was aware of how deeply I was moved by this. Also, being a kid who grew up going to church, it wasn't lost on me that Jesus told stories, he
Mm.
told parables. And I thought, oh, well, that's sort of not dissimilar. So I just had this initial attraction uh, to telling stories and to communicating expressively to the world and just trying to find your place in the world. And so that morphed into things like doing plays in school. I remember in the 7th grade, I wrote comedy skits, typed them up on a typewriter, put them in my suitcase, and went to summer camp with them so that we'd have good material for talent night. And I'm like, who does that? Now I look back on it, I've got friends that I've seen recently that go, oh yeah, no, you showed up. And part of it was to have a reason to talk to the cute girls at camp. I wrote you a part, uh, but it was fun. It was a fun thing to do, and I got a lot of affirmation from it, and they were funny and they were pretty good. And the rest of us were making, the other folks were making up, skits at free time the day of, and I had with the fifth draft of a comedy sketch, and it worked better, and the audience thought it was great, and I just got a lot of affirmation from that. And I don't know, so that there's the short long story of how the fuse gets lit, and then you kind of move your way through high school and college and doing the same stuff on a different scale, and then you grow up and go out into the world and you try and figure out, well, wait, you can get paid to do this? How do you do that? How do you learn this? And as you can see from the movie posters behind me, being influenced by greater and larger, works of cinema and art. It was a world that I understood. It was a world that I loved, and it was one that I wanted to figure out how to be a part of. And so I've just kind of worked through the years to find a way how to do that. And that takes us to, 2024 and season 2 of Going Home, and being able to try and meld the elements of faith with the elements of expressing myself to the world, to telling stories that I think might be important to the world or have been important to me, and therefore I'm guessing will connect with other people also. And Going Home was also a special project where I got to write with my wife. And Kara and I had never written together before. She'd improved lots of scripts quietly on the side, going, I don't know if this should happen here, and I'd really not like that, and then realize she's right. And so when the idea of Going Home was sort of visited upon me, and I'd call it a Holy Spirit thing. It's like one minute
Mm.
the idea is there, the next minute, or one minute it's not there, the next minute it is, and it's going, oh, I've never seen a medical show where you're not trying to save the patient. Wait a
Mm.
second, I think we got something here. And then at that point you feel like you're a steward to an idea that has been gifted to you, that
Mm.
you've been trusted with this, so you better bring all that you have. And one of those great resources was my wife, who's very observant and a spiritual woman, and
Mm.
very thoughtful and a great observer of humans. And we'd both been through hospice experience with our parents, and so it was an idea that was special enough, and I wanted to be careful and thoughtful enough to go, hey, will you help me figure this out together? And she'd never done that sort of thing before, but I brought her into the writer's room with another professional writer, and then she kicked butt. And it was kind of one of the secret weapons on why the show is so good, I think. And Cynthia Geary being the other secret weapon, the woman who plays Charlie, who you recognize from Northern Exposure, big
Mm.
hit on CBS in the 90s. So those two women really, I think, help make Going Home a show that really connects with people, and that's a pretty neat manifestation, the show, of my journey of wanting to tell stories and connect with the world, and be helpful in some way. In the same way, going all the way back to the beginning, those Beatles songs were helpful to little suburban Seattle kid who had his heart broken by his parents breaking up, but they helped
Yeah.
pick me up. And so, going home in a more tangible way, maybe, speaks to people who are grieving or have lost loved ones, or guess what? We all will. That's a thing, being able to do a dramatic show about a thing that every single person on the planet has in common. There's not a lot of topics that everybody has in common. And so it's a pretty special thing to tell the show, to tell stories about that kind of a topic.
Yeah. So Dan, I'm curious. Everything, of course, came together. This show has been very successful and impactful. Did you always know it? I mean, I hear you on the Holy Spirit nudge, but was there ever a moment of doubt where you thought to yourself, should I really do this?
There wasn't a should I do this? There was absolutely a will it work? And
Mm,
so that's what was interesting about that. And it sort of made logical sense to me as I progressed. It's like, well, if this idea came from somewhere beyond me, and I feel this compulsion to be a good steward, then it would follow that I'm just going to have to completely surrender in the making of this. It's sort
mm,
of like that seemed like part of the equation. And then when stuff started to work, my wife Kara would say things like, well, the right people showed up. I
mm,
really wanted this actor or this actress. They didn't, they said no. But then the right one showed up and made it better and different than we would have expected. And so at that point, it's like if you're going to be as audacious enough to believe that I think the Holy Spirit gave me an idea, if you're going to be that audacious, then the rest of it follows. The rest, it's like, well, of course, the right people showed up and the right people said no, and the right people showed up. And it's not about how smart I am or how experienced I am or how good I am or how hard I tried. It just isn't. And that's it's not even me being trying to be humble. That's just like that's calling balls and strikes, I think, on
mm,
how this thing came together. And so there were some questions because on the budget we had, which was pretty challenging, but we had great support from Sony Pictures, and Rich Peluso at Sony Affirm, who greenlit the show and believed we could thread the needle, which was make a show about hospice care that's watchable, that's actually entertaining to people. Kind of a tall order if you
yeah.
just hear the log line only, right? You don't expect it to be, oh, this is just it's a medical drama, but it's funny and it's sweet. And yeah, I cried, but it was a good cry, that kind of
Mm,
thing. um, you just have to approach the degree of difficulty with respect and be thoughtful about how you do it, and then hold it with an open hand and let God do what God wants to do with it. And that's what it feels
mm,
like happened. Like I said, I don't want to take too much credit for it working. I mean, because you had to have the right actors, and the right actors had to have the mindset, and the crew had to get on board and go, we're going to create a set that's got a special vibe to it so that the actors can do 10 pages a day of really
mm,
difficult, life affirming, challenging dialogue. It's like you got people dying every third day on the set. That's hard. And
yeah.
we're utterly reliant on the actors to bring their A game. Fortunately, actors love this stuff. So they're
Yeah.
like, we'll dig in. You put some meat on the bone for me. Thank goodness. So it was never a question of should I do it? It was a question of can it work and will it come out the other end? And it came out, in this beautiful form that people are surprised when they see it. I think people think going home, oh, a drama about hospice nursing is going to be one thing, and then it comes out the other side, and I mean, I crew people, guest cast, strangers on the street who've seen it, everybody has a story and they want
Mm,
to tell you their story. And so we all have death in common, we all have life in common. And what's beautiful about this show is that it helps us connect to each other through
mm,
that kind of shared human experience, and that's really at the heart of it. We get to share this experience, and as I'm sure we'll talk about, and I expect you found as well. It's difficult to lose a loved one, and they leave
yeah.
a gulf when they're gone. But if we can hang in there through this difficult time of that transition, there's a lot of beauty. There's a lot of
Mm,
there's a lot of wonderful things that we can experience, and we might not choose that route at the beginning of the journey, but the journey happens regardless. right?
Yeah.
My folks are going to pass away whether I want them to or not. I'm going to pass
Mm.
away whether I want to or not. If we're present for the journey, there's a lot of beauty. It's part of life. That's what the hospice nurses taught us,
Mm.
was that unlike medical dramas throughout television history, death isn't the opposite of life. It's
Mm.
part of the journey of
Yeah.
life. It's not
Mm.
a failure of life. Death is just part of the journey. It's the next chapter. So understanding that, it gave us a good insight in terms of kind of how to tell these stories, and to tell them with a confidence and assurance that that's true, and that puts people at ease. For as difficult as some of this can be, for the purposes of going home, it makes for an entertaining, thought-provoking show where we put our own experiences up against what the characters are going through. And we find what we hear from people is it's very helpful. And that makes me feel great as a creative person, that we put something out into the world that's entertaining, but it's helpful to people. That's a nice feeling.
Absolutely. So, you said that people always want to tell you the story, how your show connects to them. What is one of the stories that has stuck with you, as you've talked to people?
Well, I remember one thing that somebody said, and this might have been in a exchange online, but somebody was saying, "Oh, I didn't think I'd be able to watch this show because my mom just died." And then the other person said, "She goes, oh, I'm afraid I would cry." And then the other person writes and says, "Well, you'll cry, but it's a good cry, and you
Mm.
need to, you know." And so it was just that one person urging the other person to, um that grief is natural and it's normal and it's part of the process. But I mean, we had a storyline in season one, sorry, episode one of season two, where one of our key set decorator guys, a terrific guy who's on set every single day. We had a character where he was listening to the Seattle Mariners broadcast, and his little storyline has to do with he's dying of terminal illness, a cancer, and he was hoping to live long enough for the Mariners to finish their season, and maybe the team makes the playoffs for the first time in 2 decades. And that was just like a little milestone, which is kind of not an uncommon thing. You hear about people who are terminally ill to hang on till a wedding, or to hang on till some a kid graduates from school, or some other milestone. Anyway, this particular person got really emotional during the shooting and kind of disappeared for a couple hours, and then came up to me at the end of the day and said, "Well, that's what my dad and I used to do. We used to listen to the Mariners on the radio together, and he passed this last year." And I'm like, I had no idea, of that guy's situation. But the show creates this space for us to have those conversations with each other, and we don't talk about death and grieving very much, but it's a thing we all know about, and everyone's got their stories. Many times it's multiple stories,
Yeah.
right? We've lost, especially if you're over 30 or something, you might have lost a grandparent or two, maybe a family member like a mom or a sibling or whatever, but we all have those stories. And so being able to share those things with each other makes, we get to carry each other's pain a little bit, and there's something beautiful in that ability to connect with each other.
Yeah, as you were describing that, I can only imagine being in that space, right? It's very emotional, but it's also connecting, realizing that um, we have so much in common, even though there may be elements of our lives that are different. These are the types of experiences that we can all connect on. I can remember when I lost my mom, the church was really great at being supportive. And it's funny, someone shared with me, like, you're a member of the club that no one really wants to belong to, right? So it's the thing that
Right.
we don't want to be a part of this club. But the reality, to your point, is that if we haven't, we will face the loss of someone that's really important to us, and being
Yeah.
able to deal with those experiences and emotions. And I think one of the blessings of your show is it allows us to kind of process our experiences through the lens of someone else's life. So I can
Yeah.
say for myself personally, as I go through this grief process, when I go to my grief share meetings and I hear other people sharing their stories, it causes me to kind of reflect. Okay, Tam, where are you on this particular area? How might you need, God's help to continue to heal in this particular place? Or that's a perspective that I hadn't considered, right? So there's a blessing in being able to have a example of an experience outside of your own, because I could say from my point of view, it's real easy to stay kind of in your own head of how you think about the experience. But if you can see it from someone else's point of view, sometimes it causes you to think about things differently.
And everybody's experience is a little bit different, so we always have something to learn from how somebody else dealt with it. And that's the beautiful thing too, I think, about story and about art, is that it allows us a kind of a safe distance, if you will. Like, we're, even in terms of creating a conversation with somebody you care about, you can be talking about the TV show and what happened to Charlie and Tamara on the episode or something, versus talking about your brother who's gone, which might be too tender. But we can talk about it over here, and it gives us a thing to think about, and we can coalesce around this loss that we both know is in the room with us. But that's the nice thing about story, is it's not quite as painful, and it gives you one step removed maybe, but it does open that doorway to that connection and to those kind of conversations.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I'm curious, since I think you said both you and your wife had the hospice experience. Was it difficult for you at all as you were going through the process of creating the show?
It was interesting. The One of the hospice experiences I had was 20 plus years ago. So it was with a grandparent and with a totally different perspective, a total different maturity level. So it just seemed like this other thing. But what I remembered and what I took from that one was, oh, wow, they were really great, these hospice nurses. How did they always know the right thing how to say? How were they not freaked out by anything? So I took that memory into my interviews with hospice nurses and asked them that. And they had a really distinct, clear answer, which was, oh, we really try hard to be present. And I'm like, okay, what does that mean? And they're like, well, it's not about me when I walk into the room with you and your family member. I'm just there to go, what do you need? And it might be the person who needs something might be the one sitting in the chair, not the one laying in the bed. And so that became pretty clear to me. It's like, oh, yeah, when you're not worried about how you're coming off to somebody else or what the next, as soon as you finish talking, I'm going to say my thing. No. If you've got this focused presence and you understand what your job is, which is really what Cynthia's character Charlie does on Going Home. She even takes like a moment to kind of center herself. If you notice watching the episode, she'll like take a beat, close her eyes. Maybe it's a little prayer, a little centering moment. She opens the door and she comes in to go, okay, God, how do you want to use me with these people today? Who needs what? And so that kind of clarity and that sort of intentionality that the hospice nurses described was something I experienced, at different stages with different relatives and so on, and was really something that we wanted to depict to kind of honor the hospice nurses who had done so well by us. And we really, that was the reason for interviewing the hospice nurses. We want to get this right. We want to honor the nurses who have this calling, because not everybody's cut out for it. Not everybody's do it well, and it's difficult work. But those who know how to walk somebody home, it's a beautiful thing to see, and you're so grateful for somebody to help you with the burden. And I think the big mystery for some people, we didn't know, and we made this mistake, my wife and I, with different family members, where we thought hospice was only for the last week or two. We didn't know you could, 6 months somebody could come to your home and help you. And the real value of that, as you maybe experienced, was it allows you to be with the loved one, as opposed to, have to take care of exhaust yourself with every detail of caring for them, which it's hard to be present for somebody when you're the one doing all the business. And some of that's pretty tough stuff to do. And they don't want you doing it sometimes, is the other thing that factors
that's
in.
True.
Now leave it, just leave it. It's like, no, come on. So anyway, so those are some takeaways with our experience. The other thing that was interesting was I sold the show to Sony. We started working in the writers' room. We hadn't written scripts yet, but we'd kind of figured out the season, and we were just sitting down to write when my dad went into hospice. So his final 6-month clock started while we were writing scripts, and while I was learning a ton of new things from the hospice nurses, and we were exploring all these different stories. So it really helped prepare me for the final stages and to help make good decisions. And my youngest brother, God bless him, ended up taking my dad in, and with a hospice nurse on site for his final few months. He lives in a nice, beautiful tropical place. So it's like, Dad, just go sit by the pool and enjoy the weather. Just don't, and, be with people who love you and be taken care of. And he finally was able to accept that. So I was literally on set of Going Home with a fake person dying of a fake illness in a fake hospice room when I got the text that my dad passed in the care of a hospice worker, and with my sweet little brother present. So that was a pretty good mind bender that particular day, where what's real, what's not real. Well, it's all real, really.
Yeah.
And so that's I give you that anecdote just as a little background in what we were going through at the time of creating the show. And I don't know that we needed any more motivation to try and get it right, and to not, not flinch at the truth of this experience, the beauty and the difficulty, the beauty and the pain. Because then it's an honest, we made an honest show, and we got to measure it up against our own personal experiences that we were going through even at the time, almost. So it was very unusual in that respect.
Yeah. Wow. I can't even imagine. So I'm curious, in that moment when you get that text, are you able to keep going with everything? Do you need to take a break and step away? How do we process those difficult moments?
I probably processed it pretty typically, which was, on some version of denial, in the respect that prior to my dad going to, to his final home, we'd had all our conversations. We'd spent months doing all of our stuff. We all, the brothers and I, had all kind of tag teamed to do all the necessary things. So I felt like intellectually I was fine. I didn't regret anything. No conversations were left unhad. All that kind of stuff. And so we finished. This is on a Thursday, and we were right before lunch. So I just kind of plowed ahead. We shot Thursday. We shot Friday. I was directing both days. And then Saturday morning, I woke up with my 15 things to get done on an off-shoot day. I lasted about 10 minutes before I got like the second or third migraine of my whole life, and went back to bed for the whole day. And that kind of told me that it's like, yeah, you think you're fine. You're going to take a day, and you're just going to give yourself some grace, and you're going to give yourself this time to be thoughtful and prayerful, and remember, and not just push on like nothing happened. And I intellectually was absolutely fine to push on, and my body just said, yep, no, you're not good today. Go lay down, And it was very unusual, because I wasn't overly emotional, and I felt like I had done all the hard work and all that, but it's still a process, and you still have to go through it, And so that's a nice follow-up question, but that was the answer to the rest of that week.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. And I think, it's a lesson for all of us, right? A lot of times when we're, driven by a certain goal, right? We get focused on the goal and we want to move forward, we want to get it done. But there's the human element sometimes of just needing to take a step away, take a step back, create space for, just being a human being and not being a robot, and being able to push through. And even as a leader, right? So it's even setting an example for those that you're leading on set, that, hey, it's okay to have a moment to step away. There are going to be times where you can't push through. Would you agree?
Oh, I do agree. And I would say too, what was interesting, the impetus that helped with, because it's like I felt like I was prepared. In the case of a terminal illness, you kind of have a timeline on it. The doctors were off by 1 week was all,
Mm.
so roughly the timeline, which is a blessing, because then you can go, all right, I got this long to take care of all these things and say these things and hear these things and ask for these things, or whatever your scenario might be. But what I did think about in reflection, because it was still a hard weekend, and you're still grieving, and it's still a whole process, even if you think you're prepared.
Yeah.
What about the people that aren't prepared? What
Mm.
about the people who don't get the benefit of, all right, in 6 months, time's up? What about the people who lost somebody in a car crash or a drug overdose or a plane crash or whatever the instant tragedy might be? And so that contemplating that was our motivation to include grief share into the storylines for season 2 of Going Home. And so that was really interesting. And if you watch those episodes, I think grief share is in 4 of the 6 episodes. And so you see the Charlie character take her old college friend that was married to her best friend from season 1, who passes at the end of season 1. Not to spoil anything, but I guess in hospice there is no spoiler alert, is there?
No, probably not.
Guest stars are gonna die. It's like Love Boat, except for the guest stars
There you
die.
go.
It's like that. Uh, so what was neat was for Charlie and Alec characters then to go to grief share, where we hear the stories of other folks. One, there's a bicycle accident. There was a cancer. There was a drug overdose. There were other things that were sudden, where people just didn't have the runway to kind of go through the process that might have been helpful. And what's grief look like to them? And as we learned from grief share, well, it looks different for everybody.
Yeah.
And so that was really neat, I think, to incorporate grief share into season 2. And they're based out of North Carolina too, by the way.
Yeah.
And so it was neat. It was neat, and they've done a lot of thinking about it, and they provide a great resource, and they were great partners to us. I cold called the president of Grief Share and said, "Hey, I do this show. I want to incorporate this into season 2, rather than making up a fictional grief
Mm.
group. I feel like if I make it about a real one, you'll help us do it right, the way the hospice nurses helped us get the show accurate to start with, but also it's a place to point people. It's a place to point people who are going through something, and who are grieving or about to, or have a friend who is, or something. So to have an actual true life resource depicted fictionally in the show, but still be able to point people at the real thing, I thought was a good idea.
Yeah, no, I agree. And being blessed by what Grief Share offers, I think it's huge that you're highlighting that, because as people are watching and going through that experience, they can recognize that there is a resource. They maybe will be inspired to go online and look up a chapter in their local area, get plugged
Yeah,
into a group so that they can get the support. So absolutely. I
yeah.
think that was a great call. And I'm hearing a theme from you, Dan, of, checking in with hospice nurses to interview them and hear from them, wanting to include a real life organization that could go alongside people through this process. It sounds like keeping things as close to real life is really important to you. Talk to me about that. Why is that such a critical piece of your creative process?
Great question. I feel like there's a real potency to the actual experiences we all go through, and I feel like if you're basing the stories, and all the stories in both seasons of Going Home, while none of them are a true story exactly, they're composites of 10 true things, so the reason the show resonates with people is, well, while this sister who's losing her sister, I never heard that story from anybody. I did hear this part from someone, and I experienced that part, and we put those together. Or Kara observed something, or Matt had a friend who blah blah blah, and then we start kind of put things together in a way. So kind of like people joke about fiction, it's telling a bunch of lies to tell the truth, is really what it is. And so there is a true kind of, magnetic north principle behind these things where we just feel like, these are stories that stuck in our brains. I mean, we did all these interviews, we've had all these experiences through the years, we made all these notes, we read books, we researched different people, all the different things. And it's like, well, there's a reason these things stick with us. It's because they affirm our shared experience. Or again, the show is an honest show. And we were curious. I mean, I think we're curious as writers, as creators, to go, well, here's what our experience was. I wonder what this was like for them. And then to be able to kind of compare notes and go, oh, how interesting. These 5 things are in common in every one of these stories. Well, clearly this should be about that kind of story then, things like that. So I think there's a little bit of detective work on the sides of the writers to try and go, what is it about this story? Why can't I forget this? What was it that was so moving about that? And I used to do that with, movies I'd watch, like, Shawshank Redemption or Forrest Gump or Nobody's Fool with Paul Newman, and go, why do I cry at the same idea every time it's presented, no matter what the story is or the context? And then in my case, it was like, oh, it's grace. Somebody is giving somebody else a gift they don't deserve. The rest of the world would be just fine writing off that character. This character refuses to do that and extends a hand. That breaks me. And I'm like, oh, what does that remind me of? Oh, wait a second. That's a Jesus story. That's why this is true. And that took me years to figure out that. Why do these stories move me? It's because they're true stories in that respect. That's a thing that's true about the universe, and true about, if you're a Christian person, that's true about Jesus' sacrifice and his ministry. And that's moving to me because it's so counter to most everything else in play in the world. It stands out. And the other thing is that you field test it. It works every time. It's like that kindness, forgiveness. No one argues that forgiveness is a bad idea. That's a thing we got to get. That's what's wrong with the world. There's too much forgiveness. Never. No, you never hear anyone say that. It's not true. Forgiveness, grace is like this powerful transforming strength. And it's like the meekness. It's like, what else transforms? You can't just get more power, more power, more power. Now we fixed everything. Nope. It's counterintuitive. Not in God's math is different than the world's math. And that's interesting. And I think that's at the heart of this show. It's counterintuitive. The show about hospice nurses and death is a beautiful, life affirming show that connects us. So that's, in a way, it's counterintuitive in a way that I've seen other things be counterintuitive that changed my life.
Yeah. So it seems as though then you enjoy doing things a little bit different, a little bit outside of the box. And I wonder if there may be someone that's listening to us right now that wants to follow in your footsteps and do the types of things that you do. What would be your number one piece of advice that you would give to someone that thinks a little bit differently and wants to tackle topics that maybe others shy away from?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, the hard, cold truth of it is it's almost all impossible. Making movies, making TV shows, it's almost impossible to do. So you might as well do the thing exactly that you might as well try and sell a show about hospice care during the pandemic, because it's all impossible anyway. What's the difference? And chasing, and trust me, I've tried to come up with the most mainstream top 40, everybody will love this idea, keep it simple, everybody will love it idea. They don't work. They don't get sold. They don't buy. I do a documentary about faith and culture called Lord Save Us from Your Followers, 15 years ago. It's like, and then people watch it and are deeply moved by it, and it works. It's great. It's complicated for people though. And, it's like same with Going Home. It's like, I create a marketing problem, but it's a great story if you can sit down and watch it, that kind of thing. So that's my advice. It's like, if something is on your heart, or if you're blessed enough to have the Holy Spirit visit you and give you an idea, figure out how to be the best steward you can. and that it's no less likely that that'll work than any other kind of thing. So, I mean, I don't try to be out of the box, honestly, but I clearly am. I clearly end up outside the box, and as much as I'd love to be in the box, that's just not the
Where
idea I
God has
had.
you. Yeah. It's
I
not where God
guess.
has you.
I don't know. I'd like to point out. I'd like to ask God. God, you can have me wherever you want me. Inside the box would be fine. One of these times would be fine with me, but outside the box is a good place too. So
Yeah.
it seems to work, and I hope that if there's a purpose behind your effort that is beyond just trying to get attention for yourself, which I lived through that for a long time as a younger ego-driven person.
Yeah.
Um, that's not very satisfying, and it doesn't work as well. And being able to share credit when you don't care who gets the credit, um, that usually is a good thing. And so we've got 80 people on Going Home, who anybody from the editors to the other directors to the
Hmm.
my wife and the other writers to the actors, who all get the claim credit for why the show works and is touching and moving and well done to people. So it's not, I don't want the attention. I obviously I have plenty ego, plenty of ego to burn, but uh but what's a beautiful experience is that it's a team game, and when your team wins, and the show goes out not just to get ratings or to make money, but it goes out to help people and touch people. It's like, well, now it's everybody's show. Anybody who sits down and watches the show or has found pureflix.com and signed up to watch the show, it's all of ours now,
Mm.
and that's a neat thing about telling story and creating art, if you will, TV shows to put out into the world. um, is now it belongs to everybody, and that's it. It's neat to share that.
Mm. Amen. Amen. Well, we'll make sure that everyone that is watching or listening has the link to be able to get to PureFlix and check out Going Home. We're certainly wishing you success, continued success as you move forward, not just from views and all of that, but you're literally transforming lives through the work that you do. So thank you for your obedience and saying yes. My final question for you, Dan, is about legacy. You've had the opportunity to do a lot of different things in your life. When all is said and done for you, what would you like to be known for?
Well, it's interesting because that question is kind of at the core of Going Home. I think one of the things about our difficulty in talking about death and our own mortality and having to confront that is it begs the uncomfortable questions of, well, what are you doing with your life? How are you spending your days? And are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? And I know from life experience that question is pretty uncomfortable when we're not on the road we ought to be on. And we don't want to know we're not on that right road. We think we got it figured out, right? So I think
Yeah.
that's the thing that's pretty potent about Going Home and being able to talk about death. And I'll circle back to answer the question properly. But we have talked to people who go, I don't want to wait till my deathbed to decide the fight I've had with my sister for 20 years is stupid. I don't even remember why we're not talking. I'm going
Mm.
to call her. Things like that. So I feel like the show has a power, um, to give us that deathbed perspective, that legacy perspective. But we don't have to wait. No
Yeah.
reason to
That's
wait till
good.
the end
That's good.
to
That's
do
right.
that. And let's take advantage of the time, whatever the issues are. It's like, if they can be solved, or if it is up to you to try and, sort it, then consider that, I would say. And um, in terms of legacy, it's like, as a professional person, as a creative, as a writer director, um, I would hope that kind of, as you talked about before with the out of the box stuff, it's like, I hope the fact that we're able to get these shows made is encouraging to young creative people, or to people that want to tell stories, or people that want to write books and have something on their heart. It's like, if it's on your heart, it'll probably connect to other people's hearts too.
Mhm.
And if that's what your motivation is, if your motivation is to express yourself to the world, if your motivation is to try and connect with other people, if your motivation is to be helpful to the world, to share your slice of your experience to the world, it's likely that'll be a good thing for other people too. Um, and that I endorse. And as long as that burns in you, then that's probably a good motivation um, to try and figure out how to do it. And I guess the other thing I could do that's helpful to people is if those aren't your motivations to be a creative person in entertainment, save yourself the time and go do something else. Um, because it's too up and down, it's too difficult. There's so much rejection, there's so much loss that unless you can take the turbulence of the ups and the downs, and unless it's like I have to do this, it'll be too hard and it won't be the right thing for you. There's lots of people who and I'm one of them where it's like, well, it's kind of what I have to do. And so I do it. And sometimes it works, brilliantly, like going home is beautiful. It's what I hoped we'd make. That hardly ever happens. It hardly ever comes out that good. Sometimes it does. But I'd say it's a have to, not a want to kind of scenario. So that's the professional legacy aspect of it. So I hope that I mean that as encouragement to people too, that and accept that it's a process. It's the journey. It's like faith. It's you can say I accept you, Jesus, at the Billy Graham stadium event, like many of us did in the 70s and the 80s and whenever. But that's day one of a journey. That's not the end. It's like
Right.
the journey starts. So if you're interested in being a creative person who expresses to the world, just know it's a journey and it's a craft. You get better as you go, as you get older and wiser. You've got more to say. So that's the encouraging part. It's like, yeah, just keep going, just keep going, keep going. Without the expectation of I need this result. I need result. I need to make this much money. I need to be this famous. I need these many followers. If you're chasing that stuff, it's going to suck. It's hard. Not that people don't do it and are successful at it. They do. But, we've also heard a million of the stories that the people that we think are the most successful ones
Yeah.
end up dead in a hot tub,
Mm.
from self-abuse and other things. And so that's sad because they were chasing something else, and you're never going to catch that, and that's where I feel like faith comes into it, and faith and the professional journey and my purpose and all that. I feel like they've dovetailed, at this stage of life, and I'm grateful for that. I mean, I tried so hard as a young person and tried to get famous and tried to be good and tried to make money and tried to do all these things, um, and it was just so unsatisfied and it was so difficult, and I wasn't bringing anything probably that was helpful to anybody who watched the show either. And I feel like I'm in a season now where the stories we're telling are good and they're helpful to people, and I'm not worried about those other things. And then lastly, on the legacy point is family. I have two grown sons and a beautiful wife, and it's I'm sure I don't say I'm sure it's difficult, to have a creative person in your house at times, and for this many years. And so to be able to go forward in the next chapter of life, to be somebody who's not so self-involved, and somebody that can learn and share the wisdom of and that's hard for creative people. We're in our heads so much, or oh, I'm sorry to be sitting at the dinner table running dialogue in my head for the scene I have to go.
Right.
It's like that's annoying to be married to. That's annoying to have at the table with you sometimes. And so as I feel like there's more direction and progress as a human being, that I'm making, that I want to be, the legacy I want to be is to be the supportive person for the people that I care about in my life, in a way that they need me to be, not just whatever I think I can give, while holding back to get all this other stuff done. It's like you can do both. I learned the hard way that the work will always be here. I've never been this old, and the work is still here. The work I thought was so important when those little kids were on the swing and wanted to be pushed, that I had to get back to this work. It's like the work will be there. And I wish somebody would have told me that 30 years ago.
Great
So there you
word.
go.
wisdom.
Whoever
Wow.
needed to hear that.
Yeah, no, those are great words of wisdom, because I'm telling you, there's going to be somebody that's listening to us right now that is where you were years ago. And now they have an opportunity to hear your wisdom and make a different decision. So thank you for sharing from your heart. Thank you for being here. Dana, we wish you God's best as you move forward.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. I enjoyed the conversation immensely. And thanks for inviting me on.